Tonight, a special edition of the Carolina Weather Group tracking Hurricane Helene. Tropical storm warnings up across portions of the Carolinas. We will be looking at the localized impacts that you can expect from this storm on this live edition of the Carolina Weather Group. Hurricane Helene rapidly intensifying and spinning over the Gulf of Mexico tonight as we prepare for impacts here in the Carolinas. A look on this Wednesday night at the current tropical storm warnings posted up across the Carolinas, all of South Carolina, portions of western North Carolina, including where I am in the Charlotte metro area, and as our own Frank Strait let us know just a few moments before the show started, this is the first time since 2018, taking us back to Michael, since all of South Carolina was under a tropical storm warning. Over the course of the next hour, we on our panel, along with some of your favorite broadcast meteorologists, will be going region by region across the Carolinas to help you understand and prepare for the impacts that you can see in your communities. In just a moment, we'll take a look at the latest forecast advisory and understand what that you can expect from this storm. A look right now at this 9 o'clock hour on this September the 25th, 2024. You can see the NHC cone has the storm forecast to make landfall as a major Category 3, possibly Category 4 hurricane in the Big Bend of Florida as we look ahead to Thursday. Maintaining hurricane status as it makes its way towards Columbus, Georgia in the overnight hours of early Friday, and then continuing to bring tropical storm impacts throughout much of Georgia, the North Carolina and the South Carolina region. As this storm's eye continues over Georgia and into Tennessee, we can expect hundreds of miles of impact from heavy rain, flooding, gusty winds, and even tornadoes. Here's what the storm looks like on radar at this hour as you are watching live with us on this Wednesday night on Facebook and on YouTube. And if you're listening to our audio podcast, hello to you as well. We will have updates streaming continuously so long as the power stays on here at Carolina Weather HQ on our YouTube channel, so you can always check there for the latest on the storm as we look through Thursday and Friday. Let's go down to Columbia, South Carolina. Our own Frank Strait with the latest advisory out since 8 p.m. from the National Hurricane Center to bring us up to speed now with what the storm is doing this evening. Good evening, Frank.
Good evening. And yes, latest advisory on Helene. My occasionally French-speaking brain wants to say Helene sometimes. But anyway, here's the advisory. This is from 4 p.m. And it shows this is the experimental advisory graphic, by the way, showing the newfangled cone and all the inland watches and warnings that are out associated with Helene in the United States, and the coastal advisories are coastal watches and warnings elsewhere. At 4 p.m., 4 p.m. Central, 5 Eastern time, we had 85 mile an hour winds with Helene, and it was just north of the Yucatan Peninsula and starting to track toward the northeast. It's expected to become a major hurricane and to potentially even go to Category 4 before making landfall in Florida, somewhere around the Big Bend area, and then track inland. Because Helene is going to be such a big storm, it looks like the winds will extend inland. And if I switch over to the satellite view here, you can see what I'm talking about. Helene is one of these XL-sized storms that's covering a large portion of the Gulf of Mexico and vicinity right now. And again, that's one of the reasons why the winds will extend so far inland, and why we have so much of the southeast under a tropical storm or hurricane warnings right now. But in addition to that, there's also the fact that it's going to be increasing speed as it moves northward. And so that we won't have as much time for the winds to spin down before it crosses a lot of inland areas. So that means that those winds do go well inland. And going back to the advisory graphic here, which I'll find in a second. There we go. Another thing you can see here is the large wind field associated with Helene already, and that should only get bigger as it tracks northward. So you can see hurricane warnings are in the red there. That covers a good chunk of northern Florida and southern Georgia. That's surrounded by a pretty large area of tropical storm warnings that cover almost the rest of Florida, except for the western panhandle there. All of Georgia that's not under a hurricane warning. All of South Carolina. That hasn't happened since Hurricane Matthew in 2018. I'm not sure if it's ever happened another time or not. You can see western North Carolina also covered by hurricane warnings, or rather tropical storm warnings as well. So those winds are going to be covering a lot of the Carolinas and potentially causing some damage. It looks as though the worst of it for the Carolinas is going to be areas relatively close to the Savannah River, at least southwest of I-26 in South Carolina, and then kind of from the Asheville area on to the southwest and western North Carolina. But the thing about North Carolina is that, you know, we are higher in elevation there, and some of the a lot of the region is over 2,000 feet, and those winds coming out of the south to southeast are going to be extremely strong up higher in elevation. So you're going to get some damaging winds up in the mountains, because those winds aloft will hang on longer than those winds near the surface. So we'll toss it back to James right now, and let Shay get in here and talk about some of the finer details as well, and why things are the way they are.
Thanks so much for that analysis, Frank. And that's right, we're going to go down now to Shay Gibson in Charleston, South Carolina, who's going to give us kind of the advanced forecast analysis, helping us understand, Shay, what parameters meteorologists and the National Hurricane Center are looking at that help them draw up this cone.
Right. Yeah. So there's a ridge system to the east over the Atlantic. Also, there's an upper low that's going to be moving down over to what they call Arclitex, so Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas, and these two features are really drawing it up exactly the path that it's on for the hurricane track, which Frank just showed you. And there's going to be an interesting thing that happens with that, and I'll show that shortly. But let me go ahead and share a screen real quick. What's going on right now with the system in the core side of it, right? It's sort of has stalled at about 85 miles per hour. It went up from 80 to 85 this afternoon. It hasn't gone up very much because it's still dealing with a little bit of dry air. If we look at the COD for this and run your low-level water vapor imagery, we're seeing a little bit of this dry air coming off the Yucatan that's training up and around into the core, right? When that happens, it doesn't allow this convection to fully wrap around and actually create an eye. It looked like earlier there might be an eye trying to develop, but then dry air slotting got into the system and sort of trained in and dissipated it from happening. So that as the system goes north of the Yucatan, we're going to continue to see this move over the loop current. And if we look at see if I can find that, here we go. Here's the ocean heat content. And if you see this little area off the Yucatan and this tongue of red, this is the loop current. And this is basically one of the tail ends of the Gulf Stream that comes up and around. It has some more fresher water at the top, so the evaporative rates are higher. Plus the water is extremely warm over this area. And as it rides north and gets up over this loop current, this is where we think this rapid intensification process is really going to start tonight. It's going to start to take off and really gain some not only latitude, but some forward speed and motion and some intensity, which that's why we're going to probably see this as it gets just, at the same latitude as Tampa Bay, explode in intensity overnight tonight and tomorrow to a category 4. So we're calling for about 130 miles per hour here as it makes landfall. I don't know if there's enough time for this to gain any more. I don't think it's going to make a run for a Cat 5. I'd be surprised if it did. Because of its forward motion, it's going to be maxing out around 20 miles per hour. Now, the landfall is a little slower than what it was yesterday by about 3 to 4 hours. So that means some of the effects up into the southeast region and up into Georgia will be a little bit later than assumed. But this hooking motion right here, I just want to point this out. Why is it going to turn left? Usually these come up and they get swung off to the right along cold front activity, pushed over the Carolinas or even off the South Carolina coast. And the reason why is because I'll show this real quick with, I'm going to use, if I can get this to work here, use the Euro model for this one and activate that. And so what happens is this system climbs north. Now watch this area that's just southwest of the Ohio Valley. This is an upper low that's going to drop towards the southwest, towards the Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas area. What happens is this tropical system heads north up into the Panhandle, the Big Bend of Florida, and it starts to get pulled to the left by this upper low. And in this kind of situation, the upper low has a cooler core to it. It's a stronger system in general, and it pulls the surface feature up and around it, and they sort of do this dance. Now, we're not used to seeing this at this latitude, and these generally happen over the ocean. So this is kind of a very unique event, very rare event that we might see with an upper low over a continental area with a surface low, a surface tropical feature, such a strong hurricane getting pulled up into it and wrapped around. Then it eventually just gets stretched out along a cold front and dissipates. So that's good news because it's going to kill it off faster. It's going to help it dissipate faster, but not before it does an extensive amount of damage as it heads inland. So, James and Frank, this system is nothing to play with. We've got a lot of really heavy parameters to consider here. We've got a surge of 15 to 20 feet. This is considered catastrophic. This water will be pushed in for miles inland. To the north and to the northeast as this water rushes in. This is going to be this forward-moving hurricane at the speed it's going to pick up on is going to exacerbate this peak storm surge. Also, the additional rainfall totals. We're already seeing a lot of rainfall up in the mountains, the southern Appalachians. From now, we have a predecessor event going on with a cold front that's connected to this moisture feed from the Gulf, and it's already falling. We're seeing tornadic activity up there already. So this upslope orographic lifting of all this moisture is going to cause a lot of really big problems up in the mountains, and also watershed to the east over at eastern Tennessee and down into the Carolinas and Georgia, even days and weeks to come with river swelling. But you can see the swath of rainfall over a foot in many places. And then the only other thing is, James, to talk about here is this flash flooding potential. It's really high. You got some very rare high areas identified here, especially where it makes landfall, but again, up in the mountains. So, you look at tornadic activities along the southeast coast. We've got a high rain event with a high surge event coupled with flash flooding potential extremely high. So, this has, it's kind of a disastrous recipe. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen such a heavy event push this far north and actually have these kind of impacts up in the mountains. So, Scotty, I was with you during Irma. I know he's back there somewhere backstage. When we saw Irma coming up, and we saw some of the effects in the foothills up there that were pretty severe. But this one, boy, this has got disaster written all over it.
Coming up later in the show, Shay, we're going to have Brad Panovich on, who earlier today took to social media, and he was calling this the Hugo of Atlanta, and I'll be interested to get more on his thoughts. In just a moment, we will talk to Riley Hale for his insight on what the greater Augusta, Georgia area could anticipate. But I think, Frank, you had one closing thought on what you and Shay have been presenting. I think we maybe lost your audio there, Frank.
I pulled a Scotty. Oops. Anyway, looking back at the screen sharing that I'm doing here, I've got the GFS wind field here at the 925 millibar level, which is 2,000 feet or so above the surface. And this is interesting, and one of the reasons why we're concerned about the winds being so strong so far inland, because the models are kind of picking up on this. And you can see the colors there are the surface pressure field, so that tells you where the storm's centered according to the model. And we're looking at Thursday evening, tomorrow evening here, and then going to late evening, and then to the overnight hours is, if the GFS is right, the surface low pressure area and the 925 low area tracks through Georgia and kind of almost to Oconee County in South Carolina there. But a little harder to see are the wind barbs in there, showing what the wind is at this level. At about 2,000 feet or so. But at this particular time step, this is 9Z Friday, so about 5 a.m. If you look there, the winds are in the 50 to 70 knot range, and maybe a little higher, maybe 80 across parts of upstate South Carolina and adjacent areas of Georgia here. So these really strong winds, not that far up in the atmosphere, are there, and some of that wind is going to get pulled down to the surface. So this is the reason why we're concerned about these higher end wind gusts occurring in that area, and especially once you get up into the mountains. Like you said, the wind models, the mountains in western North Carolina extend up to 6,600 feet or so. So these high winds higher up there, once they intersect the mountains, you're going to have those kind of winds occurring at the surface up there at some of these higher elevations. So there is a lot of potential for wind damage there across the higher spots in western North Carolina, but to a lesser extent there over parts of northern Georgia and upstate South Carolina. And that may be the truth a little earlier across parts of the central Savannah River, every beginning to the Midlands too, in South Carolina there, because if you look closely there, you might be able to see those winds at the 925 level or in the 50 to 60 or 70 knot range there as Helene is moving by to the west, so or the center of the storm moving by to the west. So this wind field being so very big, and the fact that these winds aloft are not spinning down so quickly is the reason why we're getting deeply concerned for some of these stronger wind gusts.
Absolutely, Frank. I appreciate that analysis. Lots of comments coming in right now for those of you watching along live with us on Facebook or YouTube. We'll try to get to them as we go through the hour, and we will get to some of the other regions coming up. I see questions for Jared Smith in Charleston. Right now, I want to welcome into the Carolina Weather Group for the first time, Riley Hale. He is the chief meteorologist at WRDW and NBC 26 in Augusta, Georgia. Welcome to the show.
Thank you guys for having me on. I've been following you guys along for a little bit, so finally happy to be on the program with y'all.
We're very happy to have you. We wish it was under better circumstances, as Frank and Shay were just outlining. You guys are going to be real close to this center of circulation as it makes its way up through Georgia. We were hoping to get some insights on what Augusta, Georgia, but also the neighboring areas of South Carolina could anticipate as we head through the rest of the week. What can you share with us?
Yeah, guys, so we've been following this all week, really, since Monday. And I mean, the concerning thing is that we got a good bit of rain likely going to start tonight for our area. Going to last through a good portion of the day Thursday, so that kind of gets us saturated again before the main wind event shows up later Thursday night through Friday morning. And that's another concerning part, is we have the chance for nocturnal tornadoes. Our strongest wind is going to be happening late overnight and before people are waking up Friday morning. I think that's going to impact schools. I don't think there's a way that school buses can be out on the roadways early Friday morning. So, and then once we get into Friday afternoon, it's kind of like we're still a little bit breezy, but things are starting to improve a good bit, especially heading into the weekend. But I mean, the timeline of it is that we're expecting pretty decent wind to start most likely later into our Thursday evening, really pick up intensity into our Thursday night. And we're talking wind gusts 40 to 60 miles an hour across our area. And I mean, the weather program we use in-house at WRDW is Max WSI. And so we have access to the IBM graph model, which usually does a pretty decent job with these tropical systems. And some of the wind values that I'm seeing from this, I haven't seen for our area before. So it does look concerning. I think with what Frank was just showing with the GFS, how that track is a little bit closer to us than, say, kind of hugging that Georgia-Alabama line. So that would bring us a little bit higher wind threat. But I mean, this is going to be a large wind field regardless. And that was the thing. When I adjust these models going 150 miles west or east, it doesn't really change our impacts at all. And that just kind of highlights how big this wind field is going to be with Helene. And since it's moving so fast, it just doesn't have enough time to really weaken substantially. At least it will weaken, but it won't necessarily have a ton of time to weaken substantially to a tropical depression by the time it reaches us by any means. So, I mean, we're expecting a prolonged wind event overnight Thursday. There's going to be the opportunity for tornadoes. That includes most of our area. Our entire viewing area is included in at least a marginal risk. Half of our southern and eastern areas included in that slight risk. So, I mean, it's going to be a long next 24 or 48 hours. I mean, this is going to be something we're tracking all day tomorrow, and then really just expecting it to pick up intensity throughout Thursday night into Friday.
I think you hit on something that we've heard repeated throughout the day, and it's the first mention that has come up in tonight's program. But it was that theme that you brought up of regardless of what category the storm is, whether it's a category 1 hurricane, whether it's a tropical storm, whether it goes a little left or a little right, a little east, a little west, the impacts are really, really the same for folks, regardless of where they're at, just because of the size of this thing. And I think you hit on a real key point there.
And I mean, how often do we get a cone of uncertainty this skinny? I mean, I think it goes to show there's a lot of confidence in this forecast. And I heard you mention as I just hopped on that Brad was kind of compare this to this may be the Hugo for Atlanta. And you think about just kind of the speed this is going to have heading inland. It's not looking good. We're definitely warning people to just secure loose items around their homes, secure trampolines. Anything you have outside, and hunker down, have a way to receive alerts, keep that cell phone charged up, because I think there's going to be the opportunity for nocturnal tornadoes. And just kind of throughout the day to see how the weather service was kind of handling their briefings, how the Hurricane Center was updating their stuff. I mean, the only thing that happened today is that we're expecting higher confidence of stronger impacts. It's just, so I mean, it's kind of getting into go time now to where we're 24 hours within impacts, and it's going to last for probably a good 8-12 hours before it's out of here.
One of the questions I like to ask folks, because broadcast meteorologists are folks who have to be at work during the worst weather, but you're still a human being with family and property. How do you prepare your home life knowing that you're going to be at the TV station for the duration of this?
Yeah, that's a tough part. I was talking to my wife about that tonight. I was like, when I go into work tomorrow morning, I may not come home until Friday night. So yeah, definitely preparing the family for that. I actually have a 1-year-old at home, so yeah, mom's gonna have to pull a little bit extra duty here the next couple of days. But yeah, it's going to be busy at the station. We're going to have to constantly have probably 2 meteorologists on staff, and then it's just going to after the storm hits, you got to go cover the impacts. You got to go see how it impacted your community and go tell those stories too. So it doesn't stop after the storm stops. We have to continue to go help those communities tell their stories and make sure we're doing the best we can.
Absolutely. We want to be respectful of your time tonight. We know you have a couple long days coming up, and we've got a lot of ground to cover tonight. But before we let you go, where can folks in your area find your coverage over the course of the next few days?
Yeah, so a lot of my coverage is on Facebook. That's where I put a lot of my content. We go live on Facebook a lot, and I'll share from our main station page kind of when we do Facebook Lives. And so if you're wanting to catch a live broadcast, say when we're not during a newscast, we're usually live streaming somewhere. So make sure you have our First Alert weather app as well. That's the best way locally in the CSRA, the Central Savannah River area, to make sure you get these local alerts and you'll get our local forecast updates too. So Facebook's always good, and always on our website, our app, and you can always catch us online and on your TV too.
Perfect, Riley. We appreciate your time. We'll have to get you back on here to talk a little bit more about something less dire next time. But best of luck to you and the station and everyone in your community over the course of the next few days.
Thank y'all very much for having me on. I really appreciate it, and definitely want to be on again.
We will have you back. Thanks so much for making the time tonight, and best of luck to everybody. You have a good one.
Thank you. Y'all too. Stay safe.
All right, we're going to keep on moving here. We're going to bring in our own Scotty Powell. He's down in Myrtle Beach, where he's been working for the better part of a year or so now, but his home turf back there in Western North Carolina, many of you probably started following him when he was up in Morganton, and he still has his eyes watching his home turf. So, Scotty, some of the biggest impacts that we can expect to see from this storm will be in those Western North Carolina mountains, because it's already raining there. The predecessor rain event associated with the cold front is already in place, already raining, already saturated in ground, and Helene's not even there yet. So when we think about the bullseye that the excessive rain is going to bring, I'm thinking a lot about Western North Carolina. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, unfortunately, it looks like Western North Carolina is going to be in the crosshairs of the heavy rainfall that's going to be of Hurricane Helene. And, obviously, Florida, the panhandle into southern Georgia with the wind threat and all that is definitely going to get a lot of attention. But I think as Helene starts to move up into the Carolinas, I think the flooding threat will definitely be a big factor there. In fact, you were already talking about that. There's numerous flash flood warnings up. I'm looking at the radar just off screen here, and it looks like McDowell County into Rutherford, Buncombe County, up into Watauga and Avery County. Already seeing flash flood warnings up that way. So already starting to see flooding up there, and the main event hasn't really started. So we always know when these storms hit in the Gulf of Mexico, that's always a possibility to see them kind of ride up the Appalachian Mountains. And that's what we are seeing. We're on that quote unquote dirty side where we're going to see the heaviest rain. And we have, like Frank mentioned earlier, 6,000 foot mountains. And so as that air rises up on the mountains, it's able to kind of just, if you imagine squeezing a sponge out, it's just going to be able to wring out all the available moisture from this event and just rain across the biggest portions I'm worried about is places like Henderson County into Buncombe County, Rutherford County, McDowell, Burke, Caldwell, Wilkes, Alexander, Watauga, Avery, Mitchell, Yancey County, over into Jackson County, kind of that mountain and foothill area where we could definitely see the flooding. In fact, I know, James, you've been switching out graphics and left and right, but the National Weather Service there in Greenville-Spartanburg has shown double-digit rainfall totals expected across that area, and in fact, some of that area under the high risk of flooding, which is the level 4 of 4 for flooding. So you can't really get any higher than that. So one other thing, this is going to be a quick moving system. So it's not like this is going to happen over a 2, 3, 4 day span. This is basically starting tonight, and it should be over by midday Friday afternoon. So you're kind of looking at a 24 to maybe 48 hour frame of where we're going to see that rainfall. And when you get that much rainfall in a short amount of time, you're going to see areas that potentially don't flood that will be flooding with this system. So, with the flood watches out, the tropical storm watches out, and warnings, please heed those warnings. I think another thing that'll really become a story is the potential for landslides and rock slides. We'll see road closures. Not only due to flooding, but also those landslides, especially up in the mountains. I do know that numerous school systems have already called off school for the rest of, today's Wednesday. So for the rest of the week, Thursday and Friday, as this system moves into the area. And was able to, Shay mentioned earlier, when he was in the emergency management office with me a few years back, I reached out to my friends there in McDowell County and just told them, I was thinking about them and praying that everything goes well. But William, the emergency manager there, he tweeted or texted me back and said, he's never seen a forecast, and he's been there for a long time, that continues to just get worse and worse as the event gets closer. So we are in store for a pretty big event, unfortunately. We talked about the Atlanta's Hugo. Well, this could rival some of those big tropical rainfall flood events that we see in Western North Carolina. So, I would prepare for power outages, road closures. There is going to be a lot of, unfortunately, flooded areas up in the Western Carolinas. And really, with the rainfall that has fallen already, and then you add in on additional rainfall, it's just not a good setup. And also the tornado threat. We've already had 2 tornadoes today. One in Rutherford County. If you go to my Twitter page, you can see some of the Rutherford County tornado. And actually, Brad Panovich just retweeted a spectacular view of the tornado in Blowing Rock. And when you think of Blowing Rock, you definitely don't think of tornadoes. You think of snow. But tornadoes do happen in the mountains. And when we get these tropical events, we can get spin ups almost anywhere. And that is a large tornado for North Carolina standards, and definitely for North Carolina mountain standards. So, it's going to be a very serious event. So please take all those watches and warnings very seriously. And, we say it all the time, and unfortunately, we see people pass away in these events. You want to turn around, don't drown, because with this sudden rainfall, you don't know if the road's going to be there. James, how many years did it take for the sinkhole in Burke County to get covered up? Like, we know these type of events can happen up in the foothills and the mountains of North Carolina, and it's just going to be one that you want to hunker down for the next few days and stay off the roadways. And by Saturday, things will be out of the area, and things will hopefully start to get back to normal as soon as they can.
Yeah, and Scotty, quick question for you is boy, I had a couple of questions. You already answered some of those. Very well done. You covered that pretty well with power outages, road closures. Someone asked me, one of my audience asked me earlier, they wanted to drive up to the mountains maybe Friday, Saturday after this thing's maybe passed through, and I advise probably not. I would probably want to wait and see what the conditions are before going up there. With your experience, with road closures, roads getting washed out, landslides, power outages, this kind of event, what would you advise folks if they want to go up to check on their cabins, right? They want to go back up to the mountains and see how their property's doing, or visit family, make sure everybody's okay, or maybe even get into travel mode at some point. What are your suggestions there?
Yeah, I would steer clear of anywhere in the mountains this weekend, just because when you have heavy rain like that, that flow continues. So you could see flooding happen for multiple days, even though the sun's out. We've seen that before, especially with river flooding. It doesn't take a lot of water to flood Boone, and we know Boone can flood pretty quickly. So I don't think, even though the system will be out of there, I think the waters will recede slowly. So probably not the best idea to travel up that way, especially with landslides and a lot of trees down. Roadways will have to be cleared off and stuff like that. And another thing that maybe we'll have to bring our friend Evan Fisher back with this, with those serious winds, there may not be much of a leaf season this year, so for tourism up that way. But this is going to be a pretty big event, and even though it clears out, I would steer clear of the mountains this weekend. Let everybody kind of clean up and maybe head back up there the first week of October as all the fall festivities start to take place.
Taking a live look right now from the resort cam there in Boone, where you can see the heavy rain, as we've been mentioning, for the mountains already coming down. I also wanted to screen share one more time for our audio podcast listeners who might be catching up. The total rainfall accumulations for North Carolina show upwards of 10 plus inches of rain in places like Boone, 6 to 8 in Asheville. Local heavier amounts are possible. Those numbers taper down a little bit as you make your way down into the foothills. Hickory 3 to 4, Shelby 3 to 4, Charlotte 2 to 3, and then we're talking maybe an inch and a half for much of the central and eastern North Carolina. We'll talk more about South Carolina coming up, I promise. We also have a big tornado threat there to talk about in the next few moments. We've talked a lot of serious business. He tells me I'm not going to regret this as the producer, but Frank Strait has something that he wants to tell Scotty very urgently, and I can see it in preview, and I think I'm going to regret this.
You might regret this, but we have breaking news from a friend of the Carolina Weather Group, Chris Jackson, who's in Macon, Georgia. And Scotty, he is at Buc-ee's.
Yes.
Getting some brisket in the pouring rain. As you can see, he's really getting some downpours there while he's enjoying his brisket sandwich there, probably the XL version at the Macon, Georgia Buc-ee's. He's on his way down to Florida to do some hurricane chasing down there, and we wish him well, and we also wish him safety and protection down there, and good wits about him as he's chasing Helene and heading for the worst of it down there in Florida.
Yeah, we wish Chris the best down there, and I'm sure we can get him back on the show after this. But, I mean, no good storm chase goes without a brisket sandwich from Buc-ee's. Just saying.
All right, I didn't completely regret that. That was a decent enough tie-in. Also, a good way to let you know that another storm chaser we love is Dan Whitaker, and he'll be chasing here in the Carolinas over the course of the next few days. So if you're not already subscribed to the Carolina Weather Group YouTube channel, you'll be able to follow Dan along. He tells me he's going to, of course, start in western North Carolina mountains, where the flooding, as Scotty was just outlining, is going to be pretty intense. One of the aspects we haven't talked too much about yet is the tornado threat, which really ramps up tomorrow, starting from the south to the north. And the first area that's going to see that is the greater Charleston area. So let's bring in Jared Smith in Charleston, South Carolina right now. Jared, I know you're going to be sitting right back here tomorrow night tracking these tornadoes. What are you anticipating for your community?
Well, I'll tell you, I think the first place to start here, James, is that if you remember the night we had with Debbie, it is possible we may have another night like that. So I think the first thing to say is that today is the day to make sure that your weather radios are toning out. Make sure that you've got your phones ready to go. Turn off that charge limiter on your phones. You're going to need it tomorrow night. That is for sure. You're going to need all the power you can get tomorrow night. It just doesn't, we want to be careful with this. It's not often that you see an enhanced risk of tornadoes, enhanced risk of severe weather with a tropical cyclone, but yet that's what we have. The fast moving nature of this storm kicks up more shear, and with more instability coming in off of the Atlantic, that is how we're going to get a fairly decent risk of tornadoes, perhaps numerous tornadoes in southeast Georgia and getting into far southern South Carolina. So Beaufort, Hilton Head, Bluffton, those areas, you guys are going to really want to be on guard for this. And that's going to continue to move northward over time. We may not see necessarily the concentration up in the Charleston metro, but you can see those cells that are spinning around, the spiral bands on the model that James is showing, coming in off of the water that around that center of circulation. And there's going to be some fast moving cells in that, and there could be some tornadoes. The shear is off the charts, and enough instability should be, it should be enough basically to get that done. And so what we're going to ask folks to do is just, again, stay weather aware tomorrow. Make sure you have multiple ways to receive warnings. These tornadoes, if tornadoes do develop, they're going to move very quickly. You're not going to have a lot of lead time with these. These are very hard to warn for. So again, if you're anywhere, anywhere really, really anywhere in eastern South Carolina in particular, and getting into southeast North Carolina as well, you could see some tornadic activity. And the thing to keep in mind is that this threat is going to primarily be overnight in South Carolina. We'll probably start in the afternoon in far southern South Carolina, turn overnight into the Charleston and Myrtle Beach areas, and then Friday morning be more of a concern for southern North Carolina. So again, folks, this is something that we've got to be very careful with. Again, these tropical tornadoes are no joke. We just went through it with Debbie. We've been through it with Irma, Idalia, and it looks like we're going to be with it with Helene.
Yeah, Jerry, great points there. I think some of the concern is also tomorrow day with some of these tornadoes. So some of those tropical bands possibly coming ashore. I kind of, put together a wind forecast, and I'm sharing screen right here, but you can kind of see it looks rather conservative, right? Where, we have just a steady increase of winds. These are in knots, right? So we're getting into the moderate and then towards the strong values later in the day. But one thing I want to caution is if you're following the wind readings along the coastline, this is basically from Edisto Beach all the way up to Hog Inlet Pier. Just know that these squall lines that come ashore can be packing a punch, and their gusts will be much higher than this, and probably even some wind shifting. So if you're thinking about getting out on the water, it's not a good time to be out on the water tomorrow, especially with straight onshore flow from the southeast with this system. That could really generate a lot of those, those tornadic water spouts right over the water as they come onto land, possibly becoming tornadoes like we saw with Debbie. We saw some of those rotations off the coast. I just wanted to point that out, that even though the winds may not seem like much out there and it may not feel like it's much going on, those barrier islands are absorbing those winds first. It doesn't feel like much inland. It's maybe not much wind in your neighborhood, in Somerville, but know that those tornadoes that come ashore can at times go pretty far inland as well.
Yep. And I think the thing that we should point out too with this is that the core of the strongest winds will be to the west. And because of the lack of friction over water, we're going to have stronger winds at the shore. But when you get inland, it's probably not going to be, you're probably going to be like, what are we doing here? It's like, oh, Helene, you're a joke. But no, Helene is no joke. Because once we get some of those spiral bands through, that's when we're going to see 40, 50 mile an hour gusts. So again, we want folks to be ready for power outages. We want folks to be ready to maybe be without power for a little bit if the weather goes downhill. You've got, you may be out of power for a bit. So because it's going to take some time for the crews to be able to get out there. Those crews are great, but we also want them to be safe. And so, so let's help ourselves, let's also keep in mind too, that it's going to be scary. A lot of you out there, parents of little kids. I know I have a fairly young audience on Charleston weather, and I know that a lot of folks have kids that, are scared. A lot of the adults are scared. I get it. So again, it's going to be one of those nights where you're probably not going to get much sleep. So, have some entertainment, have some things around, and just make sure that, whatever you do, you know where you're going to go in case a tornado warning is issued. You don't want to wait for it. You don't want to go look for it. If that warning goes off, if your phone starts losing its mind or your weather radio starts chirping, just, you know where to go. Be there. You won't have to be there long, and we'll let you know when it's all clear. And James, we can't hear you.
I pulled a Scotty too, which is what we call forgetting to unmute your microphone. Very well said, Jared and Shay. Appreciate those insights for the Charleston area. And again, we will expect to see you back here tomorrow night with live tornado warnings on our YouTube channel. So if you're listening to our audio podcast feed, that's where you'll be able to find
James.
Jared.
I'm sorry. James, I'm sorry. The one more thing that we haven't talked about is the risk for flooding. And what's interesting about this one is that the risk for flooding is actually fairly standard. It's not necessarily a huge flood threat this time for Charleston. 1 to 3 inches of rain, a little bit of surge coming ashore that's going to push into minor coastal flooding. And if that rain coincides with the flood, of course, with the saltwater flooding, of course, we're going to have problems. But we have had some questions in the chat about, excessive rainfall and everything like that. We're going to see some heavy rain in the rain bands, but it's not going to be that situation where it's going to be hanging around forever. Again, this thing is gone Friday. For Charleston, this thing, we wake up Friday, this thing is hauling butt, and is getting out of here. So
yet again, another reminder of Hugo when you think about how fast it's moving. I have on the screen right now the Weather Prediction Center excessive rainfall outlook, which again, that bullseye is over the mountains of North Carolina, upstate South Carolina, Northeast Georgia. Because of the position of this, you're right, Jared, the flooding threat is more in the mountains and less at the coast. Not zero at the coast, but less.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
All right, thank you so much, Jared. Joining us next here is a perfect transition, as Jared was just mentioning the threat for gusty winds and potential power outages. Jeff Brooks is a spokesperson for Duke Energy, one of the largest, if not the largest, power companies in our area. And I know that is yet another group of men and women who will be on the front lines tomorrow and throughout the next few days trying to keep the lights on. Jeff, good evening to you. Thanks for making time for us.
Good evening. Thanks for having me on the show.
Let's start with preparations that are happening at Duke Energy. I'm sure they're already well underway. What is the power company doing in preparation for the storm? And then we'll talk about what consumers can do.
Absolutely. Well, we take this storm very seriously. This is a powerful storm. It has seen a lot of rapid intensification. And, we serve both Florida and the Carolinas. So this is a regional storm for us. And we've moved a lot of resources into Florida, first off, to be available to respond there, about 8,000 line and tree workers, including some resources from the Midwest that we moved down into the Ocala area today and some other places. So, we're ready for a big response there, especially up in Big Bend and all that area where we're going to see such powerful wind and water coming through there. But we're also looking very carefully at the Carolinas. This is a storm that has shifted a little to the west, but presents a very real threat to the mountains of North Carolina, the upstate of South Carolina, and then really as far over as the Triad and Charlotte, depending on where those rain bands go. And so this is an area that's seen a lot of rain already. And when you have that saturated ground and you put it together with wind gusts, it's a recipe for outages and down trees. And when you look at those mountain areas, that's a particular concern for us because you get areas that are very hard to access and remote. When you have a lot of water, you can create mudslides, and then that can also translate into water level issues downstream. So this is a multi-front operation. We're preparing for power outages. We're also managing our lakes and reservoirs, and then supporting operations really in 3 different states over the next few days.
I think it's very realistic, and I appreciate you saying, right, we should be preparing for power outages, because while the company is going to do all sorts of preparations that you guys feel is probably the best that you can do ahead of the storm, the reality of the weather is that inevitably there are going to be some power outages. What can the public watching or listening to this right now do in the final hours ahead of the storm to help prepare themselves?
Well, I think every storm is an opportunity to have a plan in place. And if you rely on electricity for medical needs, it's especially important that you have a plan in place for what you would do if you lost power for several hours or a couple of days. We also want you to be comfortable. We understand that, power is not just a convenience anymore. It really is a basic necessity. And I talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When you take away the security of your power, you're taking away your personal security too. So we know that's really important. So as you think about your preparations, do what you need to do to make sure that you can remain comfortable, have the medicines you need, have the electricity you need. And then if you do experience an outage, we want you to report it to us. We want you to let us know. We can continue to provide you updates throughout the storm. If you do experience a down power line, we want you to stay away from it, because that can be an incredibly dangerous situation. Let the professionals take care of that. And because of the amount of water that we're going to see, that creates a lot of ponding, a lot of other issues that can increase the radius of risk around a down power line. So take that very seriously. And, don't let this storm kind of slip up on you, because once it's here, there's nothing you can really do. Take the preps now. And if you don't need it, great, you're prepared for the next storm. But if you don't take it seriously, we see situations like that all the time where people just get into uncomfortable situations.
I appreciate that. And I'll echo a little bit, I think, what Jared said right before we came to you, Jeff, which was, if you've got young kids, go charge the tablet, which is certainly something that I have done in preparation. I wanted to echo some of the comments that are coming in, because I think this goes along with what you were saying. Some folks watching us along tonight have charged their solar generators if they've got devices that they can go out there in the sun to keep their fridge or their freezer cold, or even those electronic devices, or even gas generators that they might have available to run some appliances, or even maybe their whole home, depending on what they've gone ahead to do. In the event, Jeff, of these inevitable power outages, the safety is the utmost importance for the crews that you guys will have out there on the front lines, knowing that it's going to be rainy, knowing that it's going to be windy. How soon after the storm can they go out? I imagine there's some sort of threshold where the winds have to be no higher than.
Yeah, our first priority is making sure our crews remain safe. They're out there in the elements working to help you. We want to get them home safely to their families. So we do have parameters that dictate when we can work, when we can do the repairs that we have. And if wind speeds get above 29 miles per hour, we can't practically lift those buckets in the air to do overhead work. So you will see us not doing that, and may have to hold until those winds come back down. And certainly, we're going to have to go out and do damage assessment in some areas after a storm hits. So you may see our crews out traveling, driving through a neighborhood, and that's us building our response plan so that we can be as efficient as possible to get your power back up. We will come back and get to you. We haven't forgotten you, but there is a process, a methodical way we go about responding to the storms. And, one other thing we think about with safety is a lot of these crews end up working along the sides of roads. And every time we see a storm, there's always the risk of people driving distracted, coming into areas where crews are working along the side of the road. And be sure you slow down and move over to make sure that you're giving them that safe room to work. It's not just the law, it's there to protect them so they can get back to their families as well.
Those are really, really good points, Jeff. I appreciate you echoing those and bringing them up with our audience here. When the power goes out, if somebody finds themselves in the dark, is there a way, an app, a phone number, a text message to let you guys know and for them to check on the status of their outage?
Yeah, we've made so many improvements to our system to strengthen it, to make it ready for severe weather. But one of the other areas that we've improved in is communication with customers. So we really want to be able to give you the updates you need to make informed decisions. And that starts with reporting your outage. It's easy to do it. You can text the word OUT out to 57801 on your phone. You can also go to the Duke Energy app and go ahead and download that now, so that you may need that. And then you can report the outage over the app. You can also go to our website or call 1-800-POWER-ON to report that outage. And then, we'll give you updates periodically throughout the response process. There's also some great tips on our website and things that you may need for your preparedness kits. So we do ask you to take the time to plan for that. It's a good investment of just a little time. And we'll also be on social media. I'll be on my accounts. Others will be on their accounts, the corporate account, and providing updates, all of it, just so we can give you the information you need, comfortable and prepared for the storm.
I will say I have seen you tweet from my own neighborhood showing me the repairs that might be underway in previous instances. So it's a good follow. Jeff Brooks, Duke Energy. Thanks for taking the time to talk with the Carolina Weather Group tonight.
Thanks for having me.
All right, still to come, Tim Buckley will bring us up to speed on what we can expect in the triad, and his colleague Brad Panovich on what we can expect in the greater Charlotte area. Let's go back down to Frank Strait, who we've been hearing from throughout the hour so far. But Frank, we're going to ask you to talk a little bit about your own backyard there in the greater Columbia area with lots of folks tuning in from the capital. What can they expect with a storm in that neck of the woods?
Well, here in the South Carolina Midlands, we're not really getting any of the extremes of any aspect of this storm, but we're kind of getting a little bit of everything except the storm surge that, will, of course, will only be at the coastal areas. As you mentioned a minute ago, Jared was talking about the risk for some flooding there. It doesn't look like it'll be serious unless we end up with rain, storm surge, and high tide all at the same time. And that doesn't seem to be the most likely thing right now. But here in the Midlands, I'll start with the wind risk. Yes, we have some wind risk. There can be gusts around 50 miles an hour around the Midlands, which is going to be enough to potentially knock down a tree and power line here and there. But it's not the kind of extreme that we'll see going southwestward toward the central Savannah River area and on into Georgia. Meanwhile, the rain risk that we have here and flooding, it's there. There's the WPC outlook, and we're in slight to moderate risk area, which is not as extreme as what we'll be seeing in Western North Carolina and the upstate. But nonetheless, there can be some localized flooding here across the Midlands, especially the Western Midlands. So let's keep that in mind, that you may encounter some flooded areas as you're out and about, and we may encounter some flooded roads. You don't want to drive through those. You don't want to turn around so you don't drown or lose your car because you don't want to get water in that engine of yours. So don't drive through flooded areas. Additionally, we also have a tornado risk, not as extreme as what may occur across the low country and farther south into southeastern Georgia, but there can be some isolated tornadoes. And of course, that's an issue. And like with other areas, it's going to be a nocturnal tornado risk. So the same applies there, even though it'll be more isolated in nature here, it can still happen. So it's something we have to be prepared for. And you want to have, like we're saying, for as pertains to other areas, multiple ways to receive tornado warnings. And also, one of them needs to be set up to configured to wake you up and make loud sounds or vibrations or whatever that will wake you up and alert you while you're sleeping that there's a tornado warning and you need to get to your safe spot. And again, let me reemphasize this as I try to every time when there's a tornado risk that we're dealing with. Make your plan, decide what needs to be done when there's a tornado warning issued in advance. You don't want to, you want to have your shelter area decided in advance and the plan in place to get your family and your pets into that area quickly, because you might not have time to react, especially in these tropical tornado situations. Oftentimes you don't get a lot of lead time. So you'll want to make sure that you know what to do in advance. And then when the time comes, if a tornado warning is issued, especially if it's happening in the middle of the night when you're already groggy and staggering around, you'll know what to do in advance so that you can just act on that decision that you've already made and quickly get to shelter and your family and pets to shelter as well. So
Frank,
I think those are the finer points for us here in the Midlands there, James.
I'm going to use that as a segue, as I may, because you were just preaching the importance of having a tornado plan. And for the second time today, we might have a tornado warning heading towards Blowing Rock, or I guess I should say the second time a tornado possible. This would be actually, I think, the first warning for today, but I digress. Let's pop this up here on the screen real fast. I know a lot of you are listening to our podcast later on, so we won't spend a ton of time on what's happening live right now. But for those of you who are watching live with us right now, I did want to go ahead and pop this up on the screen. We do have a new tornado warning that has just come out for Watauga County in the western North Carolina mountains. A severe thunderstorm capable of producing a tornado was located over Grandfather Mountain State Park, moving north at 20 miles an hour. So this downstream would mean that folks in Boone, Blowing Rock, Beach Mountain, Sugar Grove should all be heading to their safe place right now. We can see the area of rotation just off here to the south of Blowing Rock. I think it's going to be coming into the polygon if I got my bearings right. We do have a live camera right now in Blowing Rock from Resort Cams. We'll be keeping a close eye on that. We've been promising to you on the show that we were going to talk to Brad Panovich to get insights on what the Charlotte area could anticipate. Watauga County is one of his, so I think he's on TV right now. But I do want to get to Tim Buckley, who's in Greensboro, because then we'll lose you. So let's bring in Tim. You got us there, Tim?
Yeah, I'm here. How you guys doing?
Good. I guess I should be clear. This is going north, and Wilkes will be fine, but it's too close to your DMA that I was now starting to feel uncomfortable that we were going to lose you too. But I appreciate you making time for us on this Wednesday night. I do want to talk to you about what folks in the triad can anticipate with the storm. I don't know. I'm putting you on the spot if you've been watching radar at all, if you've been watching this tornado warning just came out, if there's anything that's catching your eye with this.
Yeah. Hey guys, first of all, thanks for having me on. Been a little while. Good to be back. And yeah, so if you guys at home have your radar apps going, you're watching Radar Scope or not, this has popped up right there for the Blowing Rock area. It's right on that county border. It actually hasn't crossed quite into Watauga County yet, but it's just about to. It looks like it's crossing Highway 221 right now, and then it'll be kind of pushing on the west side of Blowing Rock. So the town itself might be all right, but gosh, they had one earlier tonight. How many times can we say that for that part of the state to have this many tornado threats? Certainly unusual. And it kind of sets the stage too for what we're expecting and anticipating. You know, this is still Wednesday. We're anticipating for my Piedmont area, the Triad area, but really for the whole state. We're expecting our biggest impacts with Helene to be on Friday. So we have a ways to go. This is just the appetizer. This is just the beginning. It's really not the storm. I had somebody in the newsroom tonight saying, Tim, is it already here? And we looked at the map together. It's about 800 miles away in the Gulf of Mexico. So we have a ways to go before the actual hurricane chugs inland, right? And the timeline on that is it's going to hit Florida Thursday evening. It'll still be a hurricane in Midland, Georgia, basically by Friday morning. But it's going to crank up and move our way. So folks in the Piedmont, what we're kind of telling them is that the worst of the system for us, what we would expect is really going to be that Thursday overnight into Friday morning and Friday midday time frame. So basically from Friday or Thursday evening to when you go to bed while you're sleeping, and then you go into Friday midday, that's going to kind of be the worst of it for us. And we're not going to expect constant walls of rainfall like they might be seeing out in Asheville. Our flood threat is a lot less. We're instead going to see some of those bands of rainfall. And unfortunately for us, it's on the dirty side of the storm. So just like Frank was saying, when you're on that right-hand side, it's really easy for tornadoes to spin up. So the three things we need to watch in our Piedmont area would be a flash flooding threat. We had a small little thunderstorm tonight and it closed a road. So these are types of things we can't handle right now. There will be flooding, even if we only get 2 to 3 inches of rain. So there's the floods. There's also the winds, expecting some gusty winds, 30 to 40 miles per hour for several hours. If that's in an instant, that's not so bad. But if it's over several hours, you have wet ground, those trees can topple real easily. So we got the info about the Duke crews. Hoping they're ready. We're hoping so too. There certainly will be some scattered power outages around here, and I would expect that for Friday morning. And that tornado threat is real. You know, we'll see what they do with the 3-day outlook for the SPC, I guess, when they do a 2-day outlook tomorrow, but fully expecting a tornado risk for the Triad, for the Piedmont, most of the state. You know, anybody in North Carolina on Friday, in my mind, from the morning to the midday and the afternoon, could be under a tornado risk. We don't know exactly who, but somebody could. So everybody, you know, have this turned on, have the good alerts turned on your phone. Those EAS alerts certainly can be critical because it could be before you wake up in the morning. The light at the end of the tunnel for us here, you know, by the time you get to Friday evening, things should be quieting down. See if you have power or not, see if you have any damage. But it's, for us, it's kind of a quick hit. It's not a 3-4 day marathon like they're dealing with in the mountains. And, you know, as meteorologist, my gut is just kind of, you know, really in a bad place for the Asheville area and the mountains. There's nothing worse than that suffocating feeling when you have all this rain coming over you and you know it's going to keep coming and coming and coming. That's just not a good feeling. I worked an event in Wilmington when I was there that we got 20 inches of rain in like 4 days. And that's just an awful thing to live through. So hoping those folks are taking it seriously out that way, and we'll certainly be thinking about them for sure.
We're taking a live look right now over Asheville. You can see the moisture on the lens. So not only did we lose Brad Panovich to a tornado warning in Watauga County, but we lost Jason Byer to a flash flood warning up there in the mountains. So Tim, to echo your point, it is very much already here and already happening when you consider the predecessor rain event. I wanted to ask you before we let you go, you talked about day 3, which is weather speak for Friday at this point, because we've talked about the rain that's here now. We've talked about the gusty wind and more rain that's coming tomorrow. We talked about tomorrow, and by tomorrow I mean Thursday, the tornado threat that will start primarily in South Carolina. But I think you hit on something that we have not yet talked about 1 hour into this program, which is that on Friday, after the heaviest bands move out, if we get clearing, what do you think that could do to that tornado threat for North Carolina?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I've thought about that a little bit. I think still my biggest concern for tornadoes on Friday, James, would be with those big bands that feed off the Atlantic Ocean, and they really jump off the page, and they have some of those cells that can spin really easily. So maybe it's still Friday morning and midday that would be the biggest tornado concern for me. But looking at some of the soundings and just the way the atmosphere is stacked up, it's still going to be favorable for tornado development Friday afternoon. Now, I'm not sure if we'll have the forcing. I'm not sure is there enough upward motion on its own to take advantage of that. We hope not. But like you said, with sunshine coming out, I fully expect sunshine to come out Friday afternoon. If there's enough forcing to kind of localize any updrafts or something, I'm not sure. But there will be sun. And honestly, we had a couple high schools that they're saying we're playing on Friday night. They might be okay. They might not have school. The morning time might be tough.
Or lights.
They might not have power.
Right.
But the weather will definitely improve in our part of the state for sure at that point.
All right, Tim, where can folks find your coverage over the course of the next few days?
Yeah, sure. So we're here in the Piedmont. If you're anywhere from the Blue Ridge to Alamance County, Chatham County, we cover you. We talk about you. You can get us on WFMY Plus. If you have Roku TV, you can watch us from Antarctica if you want to, if you have Wi-Fi. But preferably here at home. We're on all the cable stuff, the Twitter, Facebook, social, anywhere you can find us. Just type in News 2 or type in Tim Buckley and let me know if you're watching. Say hello.
Do you have a fan club in Antarctica?
The Penguins mostly.
Every viewer.
Very well
dressed. Counts. Yes. Tim, we appreciate your time, and best of luck to you guys.
Thanks, you guys too.
Another look right now at the active tornado warning on this Wednesday night for Watauga County. This is the WeatherStem camera in Boone at App State. You can see the lightning associated with this thunderstorm capable of producing a tornado. I'm going to bring back in the rest of our Carolina Weather Group panel. We'll keep a close eye on this tornado warning. Brad Panovich, who we were hoping would be able to hop on, is on WCNC Plus right now doing tornado warning coverage. So we hope to catch up with him again soon. We realized that we have not yet talked about Myrtle Beach. We heard from Scotty Powell when he told us all about his beloved Western North Carolina. But Scotty, that tornado threat for you guys is, I imagine, the greatest, if not the biggest threat there in coastal South Carolina.
It is. But before I talk about that, I just want to talk about the serious flooding ongoing right now in Western North Carolina. Up to 5 swiftwater rescues right now in McDowell County. They are evacuating a campground on this is the Catawba Falls campground. Already 5 inches of rain has fallen in McDowell County just today. This is before the big event. Also, Moffett Hill Church Road and Paxton Creek in the Pleasant Gardens area also out of its banks, as well as the Hidden Forest Drive on US 221 North in the Woodlawn community, which is going to be lining up in the northern part of the county with that tornado warning just over the border in Watauga County. So it is already a busy night in the foothills. So getting back to coastal South Carolina right now, yes, our biggest threat will be that tornado threat starting late tomorrow night through late morning hours on your Friday. So we've been telling people, honestly, from the rain starts tomorrow after, or the bands, whatever rain that we do see will start tomorrow evening and last through about late Friday morning. And then, as Tim said, and Jared and Shay and Frank has said, by the afternoon hours, we should see some sunshine. We are in that level 2 risk of severe weather with tornado threat being the highest. We're in that 5% chance, which I know doesn't sound like anything significant, but it really is. Anytime that you have that pop up for the Grand Strand, and we're expecting to see those feeder bands that move in. So we're under a tropical storm warning, Frank. Second tropical storm warning in 2 weeks down here. I don't know what record that holds, but uh, we had one last Monday, and now we have another tropical storm warning right now. We do have 2 or 3 bands that look like will be feeding in off the Atlantic. That'll be where that heavy rain develops, the gusty winds, and that tornado threat. So it's not going to be an all-day washout by any means here along the Grand Strand. We're just going to see a few of those bands kind of evolve onto the coastal line, and that's what we'll have to watch, especially early Friday morning. As you can see there's 1 or 2, 3 bands that move through, and that'll be the heaviest rain, the gustiest winds, and that tornado threat as we go throughout. Any individual cell that you see pop up, that definitely has that tornado threat. And we'll be mostly watching these coming in off the Atlantic. So you may see some radar signatures of water spouts out over the Atlantic moving on shores. So, just have your plan. I would also prepare for power outages here. Horry County schools are out on Friday, I believe. I'm not sure about tomorrow. But
all of that is going to be changing so rapidly.
Yeah.
For folks consuming this later on, I would say just check with your local school district.
Yeah, check in. I'm pretty sure Friday. It may be tomorrow too, since we're under a state of emergency. But I do know that there'll be some school closures. Tim, let's talk about high school football. All of our high schools, but 1 or 2 played tonight, so they're trying to beat the event. So just hunker down over Thursday night into Friday, and we will get through it. And it looks like it's going to be a nice weekend. We may have a few showers to contend with, but nothing like we'll have Thursday night through Friday morning.
Yeah. All right. Boy. We know we've crossed the 1 hour long mark. Thank you to everyone who's been listening. Again, echoing that our YouTube channel will have live storm warnings throughout the storm. If you're consuming this after the fact and you want to find out what's going on Thursday, Friday, that is a place that you can turn. We haven't talked a whole lot about Eastern North Carolina or the Outer Banks, but overall, we're expecting about 1.5 inches of rain there. And as Tim and Scotty were just talking about, as we get later into Friday, we will watch for the potential that you guys could see maybe a brief spin up tornado. We will wait to see what the Storm Prediction Center decides to do for Friday in terms of which category that it will all be in. But right now we know pretty confidently that tornado threat for South Carolina on Thursday looking real strong, and Friday is to be determined exactly how this all works out. Scotty, I know you well enough to know that you have a thought here.
Yeah, I was going to say, and those coastal effects too. We can see some coastal flooding, coastal erosion. I know the Atlantic claimed another house. I think it was yesterday in the Rodanthe area. So also something to watch with the high tides. And we're just coming off a full moon. So tides aren't as high as they normally would be, but still something to watch. And just one other point I wanted to mention to you guys. Some serious language coming out of NOAA today with that press release they had for this event coming up, and about how everyone really just needs to take this serious. I can't remember the last time something like that was issued, but pretty, unprecedented that they issue something like that. So, when that happens, you need to take this situation serious.
If Brad was here, we were going to talk about his social media message earlier on how this storm to him feels like Atlanta's Hugo. And I don't want to make it all about Georgia. We're going to have impacts here in the Carolinas too. Whether or not the Carolinas is going to have a repeat of what we saw 35 years ago is to be determined. But when we talk about the speed of the storm and how far inland it's going to get, Frank, right before the show, taking to social media, confirming for us that this is the first time since Michael in 2018 that all of South Carolina has been in a tropical storm warning, and that tropical storm warning also extending up into portions of the Carolinas, including where I am here in Charlotte. That really, I think, brings us back to Michael, because not only did we have impacts like that here in the Carolinas, but also in the Big Bend of Florida. I mean, when you talk about a path that is just eerily similar, and when you think about what Michael did to places like Mexico Beach, I really worry about landfall, and I worry about the flooding that is going to be a problem. And as Scotty mentioned, already happening tonight. So it's going to be a busy couple of days.
It is. Just please heed all warnings, advisories. They're issued for a reason. And if those roads are closed in Western North Carolina, upstate South Carolina, don't drive around the barricades.
Yeah.
We don't need to put you in danger, and then we don't need to put our first responders in danger.
Yeah. We're going to take a couple comments before we go. This one just coming into us from Josh on YouTube. NHC seems to show the track west of Atlanta. The models you've been showing are a little bit further east. Can you discuss? So briefly, I will say this, and then I can see Frank's got a thought too. The cone from NHC shows the center of circulation, so it doesn't show the extent of the impacts. So when you look at it on a model run, you can see just how big that storm actually is, regardless of where the center track is on the cone. There is also differences between the model that we've been showing tonight, which has primarily been the HRRR, or the American GFS, or even the Europeans Euro. But at this point, as we get to 24, 48 hours out, we're getting to a point where the differences are getting smaller and smaller. And regardless of exactly like which side of 75 it comes up in Georgia, the impacts are going to be largely the same for Georgia and for the Carolinas. So yes, there are differences, but they won't make a big difference in the reality at the end of the day. Frank, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
My thoughts were about the same as yours there. The Hurricane Center's forecast, well, for one thing, it's not models, it's a forecast. And they're not bound to the models. They also think about not just a particular model or a group of them, but also ensemble forecast, which have tended to be the mean of the ensembles for the track has tended to be a little further west than the deterministic runs, the GFS, the Euro, Canadian, so forth. So that's something they consider. They consider hurricane-specific models. And again, their intuition as a forecaster goes into that as well. So they have their own thought process for putting out that forecast. Now, yes, some of the models are further east, and yes, those of us who are armchair quarterbacking the National Hurricane Center are you seeing that and thinking, well, that's interesting, something to think about, and that may be part of the reason why we're concerned about the east side of the cone a little bit. But the fact of the matter is, the National Hurricane Center, those guys are really good at what they do. And so that's why we put so much stock in their forecasts, even if we see, models say that's a little different, and another model has that's a little different as well. In NHC we trust because they've shown, especially the last 5 years, to have a pretty good track record at forecasting these things.
Another segue I want to make there, as I put the experimental cone on the screen. You may have noticed, especially with this storm, the fact that the cone is overlaid with colors. So we've got the red and the blue of the hurricane warning and the tropical storm warning. Last couple of years, those warnings have been allowed to be issued further inland. And as part of trying to communicate to the public the impacts that we can expect to see from this storm, the cone has been enhanced. Whereas last year, it only showed you kind of along the coast where the warnings were, albeit storm surge or winds for hurricanes and tropical storms. Now we've got the map overlaid with those warnings further inland. So when you look at the cone, you can see how those impacts will play out as the Weather Service offices across the region color in their counties.
James, if there's one more thing I want to talk about with the cone real quick, but
Okay.
because if there is, I love belaboring a point, so we're going to just belabor this one too.
Podcasts are for.
Exactly. The cone of uncertainty is it has a lot of names, but in the end of the day, it's showing it's showing the track error. 2/3 of the time, that cone will show where the center is going to track. So it can happen that the center can track outside of that cone too. So, and the thing I love about this map is that, you're really getting a good look at the inland impacts now, with all the warnings, all the inland warnings as James, you mentioned, the inland WFOs have just gotten that ability just in the last few years. But I want folks to make sure that, we're going to show some model runs at times that may It may have the center still within the cone. It may have it slightly outside. We're going to have those variances. Those are going to be things. And I think the rest of the panel has said it very well, but just to put a fine point on it, your impacts aren't going to change materially at this point. Be ready for, everything that we've been talking about, if we've called you out, and that's going to be a lot of you in the Carolinas, be ready for a rough couple days of weather, especially as you get further inland and into the mountains. It's serious, folks. It is as serious as it gets. And we want you all to be safe.
Shirley watching on YouTube sharing with us her memory of Hugo. No power for 3 weeks, she writes, of her memories from 35 years ago because trees pulled down the lines from the house. I think, when we talk about how this storm has similarities to Hugo, those are the type of things we have to worry about as we look beyond Friday. After the storm is long gone, we still have to worry about all of the hardworking crews from power companies across the area that will be out there trying to restore power. And I know with every big storm and every big test, every power company gets its praise and its criticism. But at the end of the day, my hat is off to those folks who are going up in those bucket trucks, going out there in the storm, trying to get our power, our cable, whatever it may be, back online. They're going to have their work cut out for them across the region.
That's right, James. And
go ahead, Frank.
It's not just that as well, and dealing with the aftermath. We're putting down a lot of rain, and that's going to go into the rivers. And behind this storm, we're going to be dealing with river flooding too. So we're not going to just get rid of all this water overnight when flash flooding recedes in 6 to 12 hours. It's going to be in the rivers, and those of you who live near rivers are going to have to deal with some flooding. And even in the upstate there, we have one river that's forecast to go into major flooding. As I mentioned on Twitter earlier this evening, or X as it's called now, the Saluda River near Greenville, that's forecast to go to major flooding, and the third highest stage on record if the forecast verifies. So that's a pretty serious deal there. And some of the other rivers in South Carolina forecast to go to minor to moderate flooding at this point, and some of those forecasts could end up being bumped up once forecasters get to spend more time analyzing it. So let's keep in mind that we're not going to get rid of these impacts immediately. It will take some time, especially for those of you who live or may work along the rivers in South Carolina and eastern North Carolina as well. You can see some yellow and orange dots indicating some potential flooding over eastern North Carolina and the Piedmont as well.
That's a really, really good point, Frank. And man, I mean, we were just talking about that not just a few weeks ago here on the Carolina Weather Group. Those rivers that have to swell and try to handle not only all of the rain that they received, but also everything that's going to flow down. All that rain from the mountains has got to go somewhere, and it's going to come through the Carolinas to get back out to the ocean. This has been a very long program. We appreciate so many of you staying with us, asking comments, tuning in. I want to remind you that the Carolina Weather Group YouTube channel has continuously throughout the event what we call the Carolina Weather Net. So we want you to have multiple ways to receive warnings. One of those ways could be our YouTube channel with radar and real-time warnings. I'll be honest with you, it streams off a computer behind me here in Charlotte. So when we start getting those 50, 60 mile per hour wind gusts in Charlotte, I am just as susceptible as the rest of you to losing power. And so we'll try to keep it up as much as possible, which is why you should have multiple ways to receive warnings. And if one of those ways is NOAA Weather Radio, that is fabulous. And if you live in York, Chester, or Lancaster counties in South Carolina, and you're normally tuned to the Rock Hill transmitter, you need to switch over to a neighboring transmitter out of Charlotte, out of Cheraw, or out of Columbia, because the Rock Hill transmitter for NOAA Weather Radio was struck by lightning and is offline and will not be back in time for this event. So we don't want you to miss out on any of those overnight warnings if you live in any of those areas. But our audio podcast feed will also be kept up to date because we realize some of you may lose power, and our audio podcast feed is a way that you can listen to us using less internet, using less power. So if we do get any emergency briefings from state governors or something of the fact, we'll flip those around to get that onto the feed too, knowing that some of you may be relying on that. And hey, at the end of the day, a hand crank radio is fabulous, and I hope you all have one in your Go kit. I'd like to thank our sea of guests tonight for joining us to help us understand the localized impacts in their community, and our outstanding Carolina Weather Group panel. The guys you see on the screen now are just among the team of folks who are here each and every Wednesday night talking weather, science, technology, and more from the Carolinas and beyond. And as we mentioned, we'll be back when we can to provide storm coverage. And I know Jared and I are planning to be back here tomorrow night. We have other day jobs in TV. You'll find Scotty on WBTV television in Myrtle Beach, for instance. But when we can pop on outside of our day jobs, we will be here to help you understand the weather in the world around you. So thank you so much for staying with us tonight. And we will be back for continuing coverage, tracking Helene right here from the Carolina Weather Group.